Please introduce yourself and briefly summarize your education and professional background.
Yeah, hi Todd. Again, my name is Balaji Sreenivasan. I am the founder and CEO of Aurigo Software. I started this company in 2003, and we are one of the leading software AI businesses helping infrastructure owners plan and build better infrastructure. My background is that I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, and I did a master's in aerospace and computer science engineering. I am an alumnus of the Harvard Business School, and I've just been enjoying this journey of building and scaling Aurigo software.
I found that most people have a slightly different definition of AI and how it's used in their products. Can you describe a little bit before we go further about how you feel that AI is working into Aurigo software?
Yeah, I think AI is not something that is an add-on or something that we lean in on as an additional tool. It's kind of become fundamental to how software companies really solve problems today. And I look back and back in 2007, we had this pivotal movement of moving from desktop and server-based systems to the cloud. And there was this huge transformation of SaaS. And the last 20 years or so, it's just been SaaS heavy. And I think we're going through that major shift since 2021, 2022 of really moving from that SaaS environment to an AI first, software first environment. And it's moving much faster, right? Just given Murphy's Law, I think the innovation pace is happening at a much faster pace. So just when everyone were getting comfortable with the co-pilot concept, we're already moved into agentic AI. And so I think the way users and humans will interact with software will change fundamentally from how they interacted before. And so it's no longer going to be points and clicks and reports and dashboards, but it's really going to be about having conversations in your natural language with a piece of software and having it understand the context of your question, understand the past history of what you're asking for, and really have a more intelligent conversation with you so you can make better decisions. That's one part of it. The other part where software is really growing is really agentic in nature. A lot of the tasks that we are involved in or users of software are involved in, or a lot of it are mundane, tedious tasks. And a lot of them can actually get done using autonomous agents, freeing up a lot of time for humans to do better, more challenging, complex tasks. And so I think that evolution is also taking place. And so at Aurigo, we're very AI first in terms of leaning into that whole construct. And so we have a bunch of tenets that we're building our entire business on. So the first thing is data-driven decisions. People want to use data to make decisions. The second tenet really is it's conversational in nature in terms of how users interact with software. So that fundamental construct is changing the UI UX of how software will interact with users. And the third is using agents to come in and talk about predictions so that you can actually make decisions not just based on data that you are seeing yourself, but seeing interpretations and insights from an agent that's looking at data in ways that you would never look at. And so, for example, you could have, a network control center, right? It's 3 a.m. at night, and you could have a major power outage that's about to occur because of overheating of some servers. And the entire episode could now be avoided with an agent waking up, understanding that there's something going to happen, and it sends out a text to a human, and the human is able to solve that. So we're seeing instances where whether it's a supply chain disruption or whether it's an overheated server in a data center, agents are able to actually proactively monitor without getting tired or fatigued and help humans do their jobs better. So we're starting to see this hybrid world where humans and hybrid agents will kind of coexist together. And we're going to make this a much more productive, more transformative experience for everyone using technology. So we're super pumped about AI being really a frontier for infrastructure construction.
So in an industry that's always been kind of slow to adopt new technology, even when they know that there's evidence out there that it'd be make their jobs easier and better, do you find that the same thing is happening with AI related technology, or are they starting to do they adopt that a little bit easier because of the way that the interfaces work?
I think so. I think the interfaces are more natural. And I think it's removing the complexity of having users getting overwhelmed with having to deal with software. I find more users being able to, take Lovable, for example, right? If the platform used to write code and you don't even need to know how to write a single line of syntax. And so I think we're creating software that's helping people get less overwhelmed with dealing with software than how it was before. So I just think that interface is making it more democratized for a larger segment of people to use technology. So yeah, 100%.
So you think that this might be a different situation where they will adopt the technology quicker than they have in the past?
I think so. I mean, I'm at restaurants and I see people talking to their grandmothers and grandparents and they're discussing AI. I just think the way people are interacting with it is a lot more commonplace and simple versus technology is not this big bad beast that you are having to grapple with. It's becoming more consumable because it's relatable and it's natural language.
All right, thanks. So to switch gears to some recent news that came out, you recently
Yeah.
commented on the ASCE Infrastructure Report Card put out for the state of Texas, which received a
Yeah.
C. So as a company in Texas, why did you feel the need to make such comments? Why do you think they're justified? And what can you and your company do to help?
I mean, we live in one of the greatest states in the country, right? Texas. I'm partial because I live in Austin, Texas. And I think to get an infrastructure report that says our infrastructure is mediocre is not very flattering. And so everything in Texas is bigger. And we kind of think that we have access to the best technology, the best talent, the best resources. And I believe we can do a lot better. And companies like us are really helping infrastructure owners across the globe and across the country, nationwide, plan and build better. And I just think that we can do that here too. And there's a lot of money that was allocated by IJA. There's also money that is getting spent by Texas very proactively in infrastructure, and we see a lot of progress. We just believe that that money could be directed more intentionally towards priorities and projects that really have the most impact. And there might be opportunities there to improve where we spend our money and how we spend it. So we're not wasting taxpayers' money on delays.
When you say, like we are spending money, who are you looking to reach as far as the people that do control the money? Who are they, and what are you hoping that the messages that they're receiving from this industry?
I think infrastructure owners across the state, you have the Texas Department of Transportation, you have Texas Infrastructure and power and utility companies in the state. We've had over 100,000 people, move into Texas in the last 12 months alone. And so we're seeing a lot of people coming in from California, from Florida, from other states, from New York, into Texas, and that's fantastic. But I just believe that the infrastructure is not keeping up. We're seeing a lot of spend, we're seeing a lot of construction, but it's not happening at the pace at which it needs to occur to accommodate this transient new migration. And I believe that technology can really help us spend the money that we have more efficiently. And so I think that's important.
All right, well, there might be a few owners in our audience, but mostly it's going to be the engineers that are listening and watching. What
Right.
advice might you give to them and how they can help make a difference, in whatever state or community that they are in?
Yeah, I would say this is a golden age in terms of leading into tech. Everything has changed so vastly from how it was 20 years back. So engineers typically had access to just design software from Autodesk or Bentley. They had a couple of project management tools, and a lot of the work that they're doing could be significantly enhanced if they leaned into the entire infrastructure of the life cycle of the built world. So if you look at the built world, it starts with capital planning where you prioritize what you're going to build and you have a charter of needs and you take stakeholder inputs from citizens, from constituents, from different folks who might have different priorities. Some people might need a bicycle lane and some people might need a new terminal expansion for their airport. And so are we working on the right projects, first of all, which is really constituent friendly? or are we just picking and choosing the projects randomly, right? There's a lot to be said right there. So it starts in the planning phase, like what are you building versus just how are you building it? And then in terms of how are you allocating funding, are you allocating it in the right way? Are you allocating it in the most expeditious way? We also see a lot of delays in right of way, right? The construction budget is approved, engineers are on the ground, and then you have vast tracts of land that the state doesn't have access to or doesn't have right of way access to. And so construction projects come to a stop. And so we offer capital planning software, we offer construction software, we offer right of way software, and there's a lot of technologies being used to really speed up this whole process where owners and states and agencies can save up to 5-6% of the total infrastructure spend and put that money back on roads, back in highways, and back in airports. And so engineers really are at the forefront of influencing this change. And I believe if they make up their minds to lean in on technology first to actually do their jobs better, it would be so much better for themselves, for the owners, and for every tax resident or every tax constituent in the state.
I think that's great advice because I think a lot of engineers just don't maybe know what they can actually do besides, doing their jobs. But if they lead, they can save money and perhaps create more infrastructure availability to get done. Okay, so we talked a bit about the Texas Infrastructure Report Card, but just today, and that's not a lot of warning, they released the U.S. overall report from ASCE, which gave the country a C, up from a C minus from the last report. Do you have any thoughts on what you would expect that report to see? Does that surprise you, disappoint you? Any thoughts on what that is and what the state of the U.S. infrastructure is in your thoughts?
It is encouraging. I mean, look, we started the company in 2003, and it's been a while. We've been training for this moment for the last 20 years, like I tell everyone, right? And so in 2021, when the Bipartisan Infrastructure Jobs Act was passed, it was much needed and long due and probably less than what was required, right? And so we probably needed $3 or $4 trillion to come out to fix US infrastructure. And they got $1 trillion and everyone clapped and it was okay. It's the right direction that we're heading in. We could do a lot more. One of the constraints that's really occurred is in the last 4 years, along with that money, we also saw a lot of inflation kick in. And so the $1.2 trillion that got allocated towards IJA really didn't translate into what $1.2 trillion of buying power was in 2020. By the time the money got to the states and the cities, they could buy so much less with that same money in terms of supply chain, in terms of material, construction, labor. The prices are all risen. It's still good. It's still above what they really had access to in 2020. But the time they got hands on their money, nearly 20% of that value got eroded because of inflation. And so, yes, the C minus to C is a big deal. We really need to get to A. I mean, that's anything less than that is not really worthy of the US being, on the leaderboard in the world. And so I would like to see more money come in on infrastructure, but I also want to see it come in an efficient manner. I think along with infrastructure budgets getting allocated by the federal government and by the states and cities, we also want to see them mandate an efficient use of this taxpayer money. An efficient use meaning, are we doing it intelligently? Are we prioritizing the right programs? And are we also using technology first to design, plan, and build these infrastructure assets?
Okay, great. Do you expect those kind of things to happen? Do you think that there will be more
A
investment
hundred
in
percent, a
addition?
hundred percent. I think we have a very proactive administration. I think we do have the right tenets in terms of Doge, in terms of government efficiency. We just hope that translates into the right set of actions at the state. So we're yet to see that happen, but we're hopeful that the federal and state governments will do exactly what's required for the betterment of the country.
Okay, again, to put this in the lens of our engineering readers, is there something that they can do to help kind of improve that transition and to make it more likely that something along those lines would actually happen?
A lot of us, and I'm an engineer too, and we're guilty of just getting into the weeds and getting into a specific task that we're working on, that sometimes we forget to stop and take a look at the big picture. And so there is something called the entire life cycle of the entire infrastructure program. It starts with planning before we get into design, estimation, build, and maintain. And a lot of the engineers come in during the construction phase. Some of them come in during the design phase. And I think demanding a digital architecture and an information lifecycle, just in terms of if you don't know where you came from, you won't know where you're going. And so just like that infrastructure assets have history of information, starting from the planning phase, through the budgeting phase, through the design phase, through BIM models, and going in through construction. And so I just think making sure that this data uh, of the asset that you're building, which is really the digital twin, is something that you're embracing. It can go a very long way in terms of how states and cities and governments think about their assets. It's not just about completing a certain construction project on time, but it's also making sure that the digital twin of that asset that you're constructing is documented and available, because that data will be useful for to inform future projects. It'll be useful to maintain the same project by maintenance engineers who come in. And so just demanding that level of quality of data, the digital data for the work that they're working on is super critical. And engineers can really help driving that mandate.
Okay, I guess a little more specifically, I'm sure that when you talk to, potential customers, you might, that are engineers, explain to them, hey, this is a way you might be able to approach your, the people, the stakeholders that are in charge that'll do the purchasing of new software. Along those lines, in a very specific way, what do they need to sell or to say in order to get the financial support, command support that they need?
A lot of times, what's missing is the engineers themselves are very competent across the country, across the state. But what's missing is the visibility into the project for life cycles that they don't necessarily control. And so everyone's working in silos, and so the information flow across the entire life cycle is missing. And so one of the things that engineers could ask for is a centralized collaboration site for all phases of the project data to be accessible to everyone working on the program, starting from the planning phase through the maintenance phase. And so just this demand for data democracy and data accessibility for any single asset is really the driving point. I think if engineers are relaxed and they're okay with using email and Excel files and one-off communications and handwritten notes, that starts leading to the opposite of a digital twin. And then that leads to poor accessibility to project information. And then no one can really help with accountability, with transparency, and just expediting these projects through completion. So I think just that the demand for data-driven projects and having a single source of truth, if you will, and having a collaborative center where all aspects of project data can be accessed by all stakeholders, I think that can be driven by engineers. And I think that's the case that you make, that without technology, without centralized tools, without really cloud first, AI first software, we are going to have a lot more money to spend and a lot less data to actually have visibility into. So as the projects get more complex, the data for each project just becomes more vast. And managing these projects is more about managing the data for these projects, right? And managing the data for these projects is just not possible when you're talking of terabytes of construction data being managed using, siloed systems. So asking for a centralized system, not just, small pieces of software that just help with planning or just help with design or just help with construction, but really software that talks to each other and handles the entire life cycle is something that engineers can and should demand, because it drives efficiency, it drives accountability, and it drives expedition of expedited projects to get done 10-20% faster.
Okay, Balaji. So you use the phrase digital twin only once in your explanation. Is that kind of what you're thinking along these lines, like the full, like the 5D with time and finances all in the model? Or is there a simpler version of, a digital twin or something along those lines that can be sufficient to get done what they need done?
I mean, digital twin has a long way to go. A lot of times, engineers think that the digital twin starts in design, but it actually starts way before that. So when you think about an infrastructure lifecycle, the most important part actually starts before the engineer's office in the CFO's office, where they decide, what are we going to do with all this money? Where are we going to put this money? How are we going to plan this money? How are we going to prioritize it? How do we scorecard it? And then they get into construction and build, and then they get into maintain. And when they get into maintain, a lot of the data coming in from the maintain and operate feeds back into the planning phase, saying, okay, here are some deficiencies in my state or city or my infrastructure asset that needs to get fixed. It could be potholes, it could be sidewalks, it could be airport expansions, but that comes in from the maintenance crew back into planning. So if you're missing this planning piece and you're focusing heads down on construction and design, you're really missing the pivotal pillar that starts at the origin story for the entire infrastructure lifecycle. So I just think it's important that digital twins is understood by everyone, that it's not just a design build data representation model, but it's really a plan, a design, build, and maintain data model. So we need systems that can move data from the planning phase through construction, through maintenance, and then loop right back to planning.